indeed a pleasure to see so many happy faces in this great day in St. Louis. It's sunny, it's not raining. It was raining, although we do need the rain. We cannot allow the rain to come into Brown Shoe Company in an evening like tonight, simply because we are going to be dealing with a great topic. I did call the local sheriff and the police department to ensure that all the rioters and people that are going to be in front of the building will not show up to be inside the building. So you are here, which is great to see you here. My name is Jaime Torres, and I'm going to be acting as the moderator this evening. I do have a taser here in case someone gets out of line. Particularly our distinguished, not extinguished, but distinguished panelists that are here to present some expertise information regarding this great topic. As you know, in America, we have been dealing with this issue of immigration probably since its foundation. Things have been changing throughout the centuries, throughout the years, but what has not changed is that we still have not gotten it right. And because of that particular inquiry and thought process, the Hispanic Leaders Group felt compelled, even though every year this group has been able to bring this topic up for discussion. It's never one of those topics that is fully covered, because the political atmosphere, environment, and issues that happen within our community never die. So therefore, every year the Hispanic Leaders Group have taken upon itself to find what's happening, what's the pulse of that topic during the year, and try to bring information to you. That is the main reason why the Hispanic Leaders Group began and was founded, to ensure that the community was informed on issues and topics pertinent to us. So this evening we're going to be talking about immigration, and before we proceed, I want to bring forth to the meeting, to the podium, our distinguished chairman, Celea. Celea?
Good evening. Thank you very much for being here tonight. As part of our calendar of topics that we have throughout the year, I don't know if all of you are familiar with what the Hispanic Leaders Group has been doing for our community in terms of education. So educating about civic awareness, about immigration, about topics like health and education. Those are topics that we bring for discussion in our general meetings. And today, like Jaime was talking about, is a hot topic. And even though we have this calendar, this topic in the calendar since January, it seems like that it was a very appropriate time. So that time we didn't know them, but we feel, well, it's very appropriate. I first ask you all to check your cell phones, and I would appreciate if you could put it in silence or turn it off. So in respect to our panelists tonight. And I also would like to say that the mission of the Hispanic Leaders Group as a representative and a strong voice of the Hispanic community is part of what we are doing here. So your membership is really helping us to continue to do these programs. And the $15 per person or $25 per organization is super necessary for us to continue, even to print out materials and to continue our mission. So we appreciate if you have not paid your membership this year yet, that you look, some of us, the board directors, are in that table, and I will ask each one of them to introduce themselves before I introduce the panelists. But any one of them, or our treasurer, Hector, can be the person who can look to pay your duties for your membership this night. Another thing is, like I mentioned, we have the topics that are discussed every other month during these meetings. This last 2 months ago, we discussed health, and now is immigration. The next topic will be education, and it's in preparation of our scholarship program. So we have actually applications outside at the registration table, and we are very proud to be able to provide scholarship to Latino youth that are going to be the leaders of not even the future anymore, but it's our present. So those of you who know youth or young Latinos that are going to college and would be qualified for the scholarship, please let them know that we have our process open and we are going through the selection. And another thing is the sequence of the meeting tonight. We are going to have our 4 guests who are members of the Hispanic Leaders Group. So this is one of the things that we do as well. We reach out to those who are members and experts in different topics. When we have a topic that will be the discussion topic, we invite them to be part of our panel or to be part of the presentation. So if you are expert in some topics that are a part of our calendar, let us know, and we would love to have you be part of the panel as well. So the sequence is we have our panelists that will be discussing for a few minutes different aspects of the topic of immigration. Then we open the floor for Q&A, and after that we are going to be introducing ourselves and telling which aspect of business you are involved with, and if you have a few words to share with the overall group as well. So first I invite the board to introduce themselves, starting with Danielle.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Daniel Placzek, and I'm just the Director at Large for the Hispanic Leaders Group. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Dinora Bamarito, and I'm the Correspondent Secretary. And if you have the want to become a member, the applications, I have the application here, or also in the front desk, we have membership applications. Thank you.
My name is John Galatuar. I'm the Education Chairperson of the Scholarship Committee. And please don't forget that June 30th is the due date for the scholarships. If you know anybody, please let them know that that's the day that we need to have those applications. Okay, thank you.
Hector Arocha, Treasurer. I am at your service. Thank you for supporting this organization.
My name is Patty Kubicek. I'm Director at Large and also involved with the Latino Roundtable from Illinois.
Idalia McNulty, Recording Secretary, and I work in Molina Healthcare.
Thank you. So I ask our Vice Chair, Jaime Torres, to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Silea. Some administrative points so that we all know. There are some goodies in the back. We like not to take anything home with us. So please avail yourself of that great food we got there. The restrooms, you need to use them, are on the right to the elevator, that case. And upon completion this evening, we need to vacate the facilities as quickly as we can. But we'll not kick you out, but they have to rearrange the room for a meeting early in the morning. Appreciate those points. Well, this evening, as we indicated before, we have a great panelist that is going to cover different aspects of the issue of immigration, and I will ask them to introduce themselves as they come up to the podium. The first person to come on board is, let me see if I can see this light. I think it's Suzanne, right? Yeah, Suzanne Brown. And Suzanne is going to tell us who she is and what topic she's going to be covering tonight. Suzanne?
Thank you. Good evening. I am Suzanne Brown. I'm an immigration practitioner in St. Louis. I've been practicing for 25 years or so. I started out working with the Illinois Conference of Churches through their immigration program, serving primarily migrant workers throughout the state of Illinois. So I've been doing this through a couple of different aspects. And my job tonight is to give a little context to the immigration issue by explaining sort of the basics. Many of you probably know some of the steps, maybe some of you know all of the steps.
He's probably resting.
convenience is gone.
Okay. I actually have to change this screen when I did it. You know, I used to say, well, green cards aren't green, they're pink, but guess what? June this year, this month, they are now green again, and they're pretty neat. They're not green like the old green cards, but they're definitely green and they're not pink anymore. So, there are a couple basic ways that people can get green cards. One is having a close family member who is a United States citizen or a lawful permanent resident. That means lawful permanent resident, somebody who has a green card. They can make a petition. You can also get a green card through an offer of employment by a U.S. employer. And then there are a couple of less common ways, the principal ones being the diversity visa, where they actually have a lottery every year for people from countries that don't send a lot of immigrants to the United States. And also, if you are an asylee or refugee, after a period of time, you can apply for lawful residence in the United States. On the family-based, there are a number of categories, and they become important because each category has a different waiting period. Immediate relatives have no waiting period. They are spouses, unmarried children, and parents of U.S. citizens where the citizen's over 21 years of age. Spouses, unmarried, minor children, parents of U.S. citizens. Oops, let me go back. Family first preference, adult, unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. So citizens can apply for their children, minor, married, unmarried, their marital status doesn't matter. Permanent residents, who are in the second preference, can apply for their spouses and unmarried children. If they're unmarried and minor children, they're in a category called Family 2A. If they're adult children but unmarried, they are in a category called 2B. Then, as I mentioned, citizens can apply for married sons and daughters, and also citizens can apply for their siblings, their sisters and brothers. There are 480,000 family visas available each year, and the State Department divides those up among category and country. And we're going to look at a grid in just a minute, but I want to talk about the employment-based fields as well. So there is a grid for employment-based categories as well. First preference petitions, the higher the number, the faster somebody comes. First preference is an international transferee, a manager, or an executive. Second preference is individuals with exceptional ability, and that's a pretty high standard really when they talk about exceptional ability, or people who have at least a master's degree. Employment third preference is people who have at least a bachelor's degree, or people who are being hired for a job that requires at least 2 years of experience to do the job. Fourth preference, then third preference, there's also a category called unskilled workers, and we're going to see why that's pretty much a meaningless category. And there's a fourth and fifth preference also for employment-based petitions. There's 120,000 employment-based visas available each year. And because we're going to run through this really quickly, we don't have to talk so much about the numbers, but I want you to look at the visa bulletin. I have taken out three countries. There's in the actual bulletin, there's also China has a column to itself, the Philippines does, and so does India. This month, for the first time in many, many years, the Dominican Republic has been added to the list. It used to be in that all other countries category, although for many, many years, the Dominican Republic and El Salvador for Hispanic cultures had their own columns, so the Dominican Republic is back. So the way this works is the Department of State each month says, okay, people who made their applications on this date are now eligible to apply for their immigrant visas, which means get their green cards. And ironically, the last time we used this slide was in June of 2009, so I had the 2009 dates on my old slide, and when I looked at them, I decided I was going to keep them on there. So they're in red, because I want to show you a really concrete example of why immigration, the way it's set up right now, doesn't work very well. So if we look in the Mexico column, we can see that if you are the unmarried son or daughter of a U.S. citizen, In the past year, that category has advanced 2 weeks. So what it means there is that this month, people whose applications were filed in October 22nd or before, in 1992, can now get their green cards. So it's pretty amazing. And my math is right, I think that's 18 years. And when you think about families who want to be together, this is your children. This is not your second cousin once removed. This is your children. 18 years is probably not a reasonable amount of time to ask a family to be separated. When you go down to second, well, you can look at any of them. I didn't highlight the second one, 2B. That's advanced a month in a year. For adult married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, didn't move a single day. Didn't move a single day in a year. So when we talk about, waiting in line, there really isn't much of a line. I mean, it's just so irrational how this works. The same thing happens in employment. So if you looked on the Mexico column, the C means current. So as soon as you get an approval from the Labor Department and from the immigration for that visa, that person can apply for their residence. But if you're in that third preference, that's people who have a bachelor's degree or a job that requires 2 years of experience, the U means unavailable, no line. It doesn't matter whether your employer has proven to the Labor Department that there's not enough workers for that position, nobody else is interested in taking that position. If you're from Mexico in that category, there's no line. Same with unskilled workers, which is jobs that require fewer than 2 years of experience. So a lot of unskilled jobs, we would call them. There just isn't a way to immigrate legally to the United States under this paradigm. So I think it raises the really big question, like when people say, okay, why don't they just wait in the back of the line or get in the line? There really is no line. So just as a reality check on that screen, I'm going to say, in a system where family reunification takes 2 decades, we need to be re-examining how this works. We need to look at when people maybe have waited their 18 years or their 9 years, and it's their turn to immigrate because of changes in the immigration law in 1996. They're not even eligible to immigrate anymore because of the time that they've spent in the United States. There are really virtually no avenues available for legal workers, unskilled workers in the United States. There's a very, very, very narrow classification of agricultural workers, seasonal agricultural workers, and seasonal workers. But even here in Missouri, we're disadvantaged by that because you can only apply a certain number of days before your season begins, and our season begins later than the season in Arkansas, or Georgia, or Florida. And while they've tried to make some small fixes around that, it still doesn't work. So many employers of seasonal workers have just given up on the system because they spend a lot of money trying to recruit and get the Labor Department to approve their petitions. The Labor Department approves them, but by the time it gets through the Immigration Service, there's no visas available anymore because they've been used by other companies, often in regions whose seasons begin earlier than our own. So to me, what all of this reflects are reasons why many people don't go through a legal path to immigration, because there is no legal path to immigration. And that increases illegal immigration, it keeps people here in the country. Once they do come in for whatever reason, because it's dangerous in the border and they can't go back, and they can't take the risk of going back and forth, at the danger or the expense of going back and forth, so it permanizes a community here. And I think that all leads to the kind of situation where people in Arizona are saying, well, wait a second, what's going on here? We need to re-examine. So this is a little, I hope, basic primer immigration, how this sort of works, but mostly how it doesn't work. And I think our other panelists will sort of fill in some of the holes here.
Okay. You're just gonna use it? Okay. Well, Suzanne is getting the next phase on. Let me call Richard Middleton, Dr. Richard Middleton, licenciado, recién licenciado. He'll give us an introduction who he is and what he was going to be speaking about.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. No, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. My name is Richard Middleton, and I'm an associate professor of political science at the University of Missouri St. Louis. I'm also an adjunct professor of law at St. Louis University School of Law. And I actually also am a solo practitioner. I have my own practice. My specialty is immigration law. And I want to talk a little bit about the evolving debate centering on why states have begun to promulgate their own sort of immigration statutes, if you will, and in many instances localities as well. And what these states and localities are doing in an attempt to sort of insulate, if you will, their statutes from legal challenges. What we're seeing on the national front is that there is a well-organized, a well-funded movement towards assisting states to craft statutes that affect the rights of immigrants. And tonight I'm going to use the language non-citizens, because under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the language is an alien, which means a non-citizen. To affect the rights of non-citizens and to sort of insulate those statutes from being challenged as being unconstitutional under the United States Constitution. It's a very, very sort of nuanced approach. What we're seeing is that the movement is really being spearheaded by a professor of law at University of Missouri, Kansas City. His name is Professor Chris Kobosh. A very well-trained, very intelligent man. He very much knows immigration law, and he's been able to assist municipalities such as Valley Park. He was one of the authors of the legislation in Arizona, the contentious legislation that you saw recently passed this year. And I actually had a chance to email him and call him out on some errors, some conflicts they had in the Arizona statute, and they were able to sort of catch them and fix them and modify them in the House bill that came out a couple of days later. But what I'm going to talk about is what's the legal basis that these states are using to sort of insulate their statutes from legal challenges. And I have something prepared, so if you will indulge me. Many well-meaning observers may ask the question, what's wrong with a state such as Arizona passing a law aimed at addressing what it deems to be a serious problem connected to the unlawful presence of persons within its state borders? Shouldn't Arizona have the right? Should they have the power to promulgate such legislation? Assuming that there truly exists a range of problems having a nexus to the unlawful presence of migrants, I think in reality these are fair questions. Now, you may be surprised to learn that the question of the proper role, if there be any, of states in promulgating legislation that touches upon and affects the right of non-citizens has been litigated as long as 160 years ago. So this is not a new issue. State laws affecting immigration were posited by the U.S. Supreme Court in the passenger cases, 1849, and in Henderson versus Mayor of New York, 1876. These cases were ultimately decided in the guise of the Interstate Commerce Clause, and clearly well before the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed in 1952. However, in U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark in 1898, the Supreme Court held that the citizenship provision of the 14th Amendment, which says that any person born or naturalized in the United States is a citizen of the United States, trumped the state of California's legal rationale for denying U.S. citizenship status to a child born to Chinese nationals on U.S. soil. In effect, the child's parents were lawful permanent residents at the time he was born in California. But perhaps most important to this discussion is the Supreme Court's holding in a case that you should remember. And this is sort of the core of this debate. The name of this case is Decanis versus BICA, D-E-C-A-N-A-S versus BICA, B-I-C-A, 1976. The Supreme Court in that case said, quote, "The power to regulate immigration is unquestionably, exclusively a federal power." So there we have our answer. We can all go home, right? It's a federal power. Not so fast. In defining what it meant by, quote, regulate immigration, the court articulated the following. The power to regulate immigration is essentially a determination of who should or should not be admitted into the country and the conditions under which a legal entrant may remain, period. Who can enter, who cannot enter, and for those we do allow to enter the United States, the conditions under which they can remain. That's it. That's what it means to regulate immigration. In addition, here's the critical language. The Supreme Court ruled, even if a state regulation, this is what Arizona knows, has become purely speculative and indirect impact on immigration, it does not thereby become a constitutionally prescribed regulation of immigration. So the door was left open for states to promulgate statutes that touch upon and affect the rights of non-citizens, as long as they don't, quote unquote, regulate immigration. It is this language, I think, that gives the state some degree of power to promulgate legislation that affects the rights of non-citizens, and to do so in ways that potentially abut much of the federal power to do the same. In other words, whereas the states have no power to regulate immigration, they do have power to promulgate laws that affect the rights of non-citizens, so long as Congress has not already significantly legislated in that area. So the next critical question is, what happens when a state, let's say Arizona, promulgates a law that affects the rights of non-citizens? The Supreme Court has fashioned a difficult and somewhat onerous test that must be used to analyze such laws. The court has held that where the U.S. Congress has explicitly precluded the states from legislating in a manner affecting non-citizens, the states are expressly preempted under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. One such example is in INA 274AH, where it says no state or local jurisdiction can pass any law providing for criminal or civil sanctions for the employment of unauthorized aliens. That's exclusively a federal power. It said also in that section, unless they be of licensing or other measures. So what have the local and state governments done? They pull your business license if you hire an unauthorized alien. They just simply can't make it a civil or criminal sanction because they're expressly preempted by federal law. Now, the Supremacy Clause says in a nutshell that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and federal laws rank next highest. State and local laws are inferior in rank. But express preemption cases in immigration law are not the norm. Instead, the question that often arises is if the U.S. Congress has implicitly preempted the states. The language used here, this is what the language you should remember, is field preemption and conflict preemption. Field preemption and conflict preemption. Here's what field preemption asks. Has Congress so significantly legislated in an area of immigration law as to implicitly oust the states? And many observers say that IRCA, the Immigration Reform Control Act of 1986, was such a measure. It so significantly regulated the employment of unauthorized aliens as that the states were ousted, that the states had no power. And that's what happened. In Decanis, the decision was pre-IRCA, and so the court allowed California to maintain its law regulating the employment of unauthorized aliens, but along comes 1986, IRCA, and no state can pass such a law. Also, conflict preemption, on the other hand, asks the question, does a state law undermine or stand as an obstacle to compliance with federal immigration law? In other words, the two laws can't stand. Federal law and state and local law conflict. The state and local laws sort of usurp the federal superintendents in the field. Now, if either field or conflict preemption is present, the state law is struck down under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Now, with this legal framework in mind, what many states have begun doing is to model their immigration laws after federal immigration law, or incorporate nearly verbatim the language used in federal immigration law. They do this in an attempt to circumvent their state laws being found unconstitutional on grounds of preemption, federal preemption. That is why if you read the Arizona statute, it mirrors federal immigration law in many ways. In other words, Arizona would like to be able to say, hey, all we're doing is enforcing federal immigration law. So then what's the problem? Well, I'd like to offer just a few realities and allow you to draw your own conclusions about any potential problems. One, the states often attempt to freelance in crafting their immigration laws, and in the process, they sometimes adopt measures that conflict with federal law. That's a no-no, right? It's preempted. For example, the Arizona statute as drafted in Senate Bill 1070 penalizes any person who fails to carry their alien registration card, their green card. Federal law does the same thing. Section 13, Title 8, Section 1304E. However, the Arizona law calls for a minimum fine, the bare minimum fine, that exceeds the maximum fine under the federal law. That's not permissible. That's preempted. And that's what I emailed Professor Chris Kovash, and he said, oh, you're right, they'll fix it. In addition, under federal law, the infraction is no higher than a misdemeanor to do so. It can never be more than a misdemeanor to fail to carry your green card under federal law. But in Arizona, such an infraction can be a felony. That's a conflict. As I mentioned, Arizona attempted to address some of these conflicts, and they did so in what's called House Bill 2162, but they didn't fix all of the conflicts. There are many more. That's just a sample. Here's issue number 2. Our federal system consists of 50 state statutory schemes and 1 federal scheme. Thus, you have 51 bodies of law. Now, when states promulgate their own statutes in the area of immigration law, there exists what? 51 distinct possibilities and approaches towards immigration law. That's a patchwork approach. You can imagine you get disparate results when you have 51 different approaches towards affecting the rights of non-citizens. And last but not least, immigration law is complex and ever-changing. Many state immigration statutes do not even recognize some of the legal statuses non-citizens can hold under federal law. The Arizona statute is one example. Some of these statuses include asylee status, temporary protected status, parolee status, or something called registry. You can get a green card through a little-known provision called registry. When the federal government promulgates new statutes and regulations, it would be incumbent upon the states to make themselves abreast of these developments in order to ensure their state statutes do not conflict with state law.
Thank you. Richard forgot to mention the 51st state of Puerto Rico, but that's okay.
I would never say that.
Are you taking notes?
Never.
You need to take notes and make sure that any queries that are coming up to your mind, you note it down, because this is great information. It's not convoluted. I think everything adds up to it, and it'll rise to the point in which at the end, I think we'll be able to see the picture. You don't have to have questions, but we expect you to ask some questions because this expertise is pro bono tonight. Later on, you're going to charge you. Okay, followed now by Dr. Joel Jennings, who's going to, what, is it Susana or you? Oh, Jennifer. Ella quiere que tú vengas ahora. Let's see what Jennifer is going to do, and Jennifer will introduce herself to us. The last time we saw each other was in Cambio de Colores, and she had a great presenter there, but didn't have any questions. Go ahead.
Get my presentation going here. Hi, I'm Jennifer Rothna, and I'm the Executive Director of Missouri Immigrant and Refugee Advocates, which is a coalition of about 50 organizations across the state of Missouri that advocate for the basic rights of immigrants and refugees. And I'm just going to give a little bit of basic information, like Suzanne tried to do, and give some overviews of the legislative trends we've been seeing here in Missouri. and take a little bit of what Richard has said and apply it to what we're seeing here in Missouri. So just bear with me, I'm going to do a little bit of basic demographic information. And Richard mentioned that the state of Arizona asked the question, do we have a serious problem when it comes to unauthorized immigration? And so you might think that Missouri might apply the same test. Do we have an issue? Well, about 3.5% of our population here in Missouri is foreign born. So that's a very small percentage, and nationwide the percentage is more like 12%. So that's something we can all ruminate on. Do we have a problem? Of those, the immigrants who have already become citizens are at 42%. So almost half of the foreign-born individuals who have come to the state of Missouri have already naturalized. Again, we can ask ourselves, is this a problem? Do we have a huge number of unauthorized individuals in Missouri? In fact, non-citizen immigrants, of course, doesn't imply that those people are here without authorization. They could be in any number of legal statuses that Suzanne has touched upon, that Richard has touched upon. So there are as many statuses as there are letters of the alphabet, and really, in fact, more. And this is just a basic overview of where foreign-born individuals in Missouri come from. Many people are surprised that individuals of Asian origin make up the largest number of foreign-born individuals in Missouri. And we often see this issue, the issue of immigration, cast as a Latino issue. So that's another thing to think about. We actually have a very diverse foreign-born population here in Missouri, even though it's small. This is just a slide based on census data. And you can see that there is hardly a county in Missouri that immigration doesn't touch. So there are immigrants all over our state, not just in St. Louis, not just in Kansas City, but all over. And someone introduced a similar map to this, pulled from census data, again, at Cambio, and showed that there are actually Latinos in every single county in Missouri. Not necessarily foreign-born, obviously. So what are we seeing here in Missouri in terms of legislative trends? In 2007, we saw over 25 anti-immigrant bills. So again, those are bills that seek to, what, as Richard described, mitigate the rights of non-citizens. And in the view of MIRA, we say in a negative way. In 2008, we saw more than 35 anti-immigrant bills. And in 2008, the state passed House Bill 1549, which I had the pleasure of addressing you about at this immigration session last year. And I will touch on that briefly in a moment. And then after the state passed that, the state legislature passed House Bill 1549, there was sort of a been there, done that attitude with 2009. So you can see that there was a dramatic reduction in anti-immigrant bills that were filed at the state legislative level. One did pass in 2009, mostly fixes to that bill from 2008, because as Richard alluded to, states often freelance and go out on their own and do things that may actually cause difficulty in enforcing the law or for people to comply and so forth. And then this year we saw, again, a reduction. Immigration wasn't a main issue in our legislature, actually until the Arizona law came along. So as soon as that became a major issue, we saw an Arizona type bill substitute that was going to be introduced in our legislature, and I would be happy to answer more questions about that. Many of you have probably seen the press around Representative Parkinson of St. Charles, who plans to file that piece of legislation next year, citing the fact that he didn't have enough time to take the bill through the full process in our legislative session this year. So I put the question marks up there of what will we see in 2011. And I think probably we'll see an uptick again in anti-immigrant legislation with Arizona-type legislation leading the way. So I think Representative Parkinson has made it clear that there aren't really any question marks. He plans to introduce legislation similar to what Arizona has here in Missouri. And again, just to go back, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, what problem are we solving with that type of legislation here in Missouri? So just a brief overview of House Bill 1549. The title was Changes the Laws Regarding Illegal Aliens and status verification. Again, states can't really enter into the realm of telling people who can enter, who cannot enter, and what conditions they can remain. Again, that's what Richard shared with us. And so instead, they decided to regulate all of these other areas: enforcement of immigration law, sanctuary cities, public benefits, misclassification of employees, other employment issues, driver's licenses, communications with federal government. So the list really goes, runs the gamut. So if you have any questions about what specifically is going on in Missouri in relation to all these, you can save them for our Q&A at the end. But the state really went all out and decided to regulate a lot of different issues related to immigration. And some that aren't really expressly related to immigration. You think driver's license or bail or occupational safety and health. What do those have to do with immigration? So, and that's actually a question, because Missouri laws are supposed to only deal with one topic. So some scholars thought maybe those pieces would be repealed because they didn't expressly deal with immigration, but that hasn't been the case. So why did we see House Bill 1549 here in Missouri? And it's much of what you've been hearing already. We have an immigration system that isn't working, and reform has been a congressional priority over the last several years. And the last time it was seriously debated, of course, it died in the Senate. And so in response, states and municipalities have begun developing their own immigration laws and policies. And we see those coming across on a range of issues. Missouri, of course, isn't the only state to do this. All around the country, states and municipalities are introducing immigration-related legislation. And it's not all negative. In a lot of places, there are wonderful policies to help immigrants integrate into the community, help people learn English, help students have higher achievement, all sorts of things that are great programs, but we haven't seen legislation like that here in Missouri, or policies that would lend themselves to welcoming people into our community. And I think in 2008 we saw an uptick in immigration issues with the election cycle. And so many people were using immigration as a campaign issue to talk about, and here we are again. We're seeing it in some of the races in 2010. So 1549 currently doesn't have regulations for all portions of the bill, so many people in Missouri actually don't know how to comply. It's a very tricky situation. Along with my friend there in the back, Ms. Courtney Berg, we've been doing presentations all around the state for service providers to help them think about how they distribute benefits in the community, how they serve immigrant clients, and really give some best practices for complying the best they can with the immigration law here in Missouri. And MIRA continues to monitor local ordinances, racial profiling issues, and other related issues. And many of you have probably seen more press about that as the Attorney General released the racial profiling report just last week. And again, we advocate for changes in the law that make it more welcoming for immigrants here in Missouri and help people who are eligible for the benefits, for certain benefits here in the U.S. to be able to get the benefits that they are eligible for. So this is just a quick overview of what happened at the 2010 legislative session. I did mention some of these already, but I will say there was a large focus on driver's licenses. 4 of the 7 bills that were related to immigration dealt with driver's licenses. So everything from making the test available only in English for a regular driver's license to restricting driver's licenses to only citizens. So we had a range of issues to deal with, something that I would propose is not really a problem here in the state of Missouri. And then we did have one piece of positive legislation. Senator Jolie Justice of Kansas City introduced what was called the Missouri Dream Act, which would have allowed for in-state tuition for undocumented students who wanted to attend higher education here in Missouri, public institutions. I think you're going to hear more about these topics from Joel in a minute, but just to give a quick look at what's happening at the local, state, and federal level. So at the local level, we are seeing municipalities, not just states, adopt ordinances that mirror what states have adopted. So municipalities such as St. Anne considering a 1549 type ordinance at their Board of Aldermen level. And again, we're seeing an uptick in racial profiling and issues with the state's 287G agreement, which is the state of Missouri's agreement with the Department of Homeland Security to have certain troopers who can enforce immigration law. So they have training to do that. But again, let me just stress, that is by no means all of our police officers, certainly not our municipal officers, and doesn't extend to the vast majority of law enforcement in our state. So only, probably around less than 20 officers have that type of training in our entire state. MIRA also is doing Know Your Rights trainings and other types of education to help people understand what their rights are here in the U.S., no matter what status they're here with, and then again, advocacy for individuals, especially children who are applying for health insurance or food stamps or things like that. At the state level, we've seen across the nation children's health insurance program reauthorization. So the federal government went ahead and reauthorized CHIP and gave states the opportunity to eliminate the 5-year waiting period. So legal permanent residents have to wait 5 years to access most benefits in the U.S. So again, we ask the question, well, if a person is here and they've gone through the legal challenges, as challenging as they may be, why is a child or anyone having to wait that additional period of time to access benefits that they might need? We are working on additional interpreter funding to make sure people have access to that. And the issue of enrollment has been an ongoing one at the University of Missouri system. So not only is in-state tuition not available, but the University of Missouri system, it's very difficult if you are out of status to enroll in a Missouri institution. It does happen, but the policy is that undocumented students are not able to enroll. And then, of course, I think we're going to continue to see efforts like Arizona coming here to Missouri, where those types of policies are going to make our state even less welcoming to immigrants and refugees. And then just last, everybody wants to know what's happening at the national level. How are we going to fix this? The one silver lining, perhaps, I would propose from Arizona's law is that it put immigration back at center stage as an issue for the federal government to deal with. And the healthcare debate derailed many of the legislative priorities that were on the docket for 2009 and 2010. But we are still seeing a big push from students for the Development, Relief, and Education of Alien Minors Act, the DREAM Act, which would help the status of students who are undocumented again, and ag jobs, which is specifically for agricultural workers. CIR, ASAP, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform American Security and Prosperity Act is the only piece of comprehensive legislation that has been proposed in the House of Representatives, and the Senate has had a blueprint, but obviously the Senate can't debate a blueprint on the floor. So we're seeing a lot of enforcement type measures that are being attached to other things, since there's no comprehensive legislation to take a look at. So just in the last couple of weeks, we saw with the Supplemental Appropriations Act, and I'm sure this is sort of, we're not all watching C-SPAN all day, but they tried to, several senators tried to attach enforcement funding or enforcement measures to the Appropriations Act, but all of those did in fact fail. And then, we've heard about some announcements from the administration about sending additional troops or allocating additional money and changes that might be happening at the Department of Homeland Security. And I personally think it's unlikely that we'll see a comprehensive bill by the end of 2010, unless it happens in the lame duck session post-election. So I think this is what we can expect in 2010, more state-level fixes to what people are perceiving as problems in their states. campaigns that are a referendum on what the Obama administration has been doing in relationship to immigration as well as many other topics. And then Mira is continuing to work on some initiatives to make the state of Missouri more welcoming for immigrants and refugees. So I will put this, questions and discussion, but that can be after Joel. So.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Joel Jennings is going to wrap it up, and then we're going to go into the process of questions and answers.
Let me be very clear with my first statement. Immigration is not a Hispanic issue. It is an issue. It's an issue of civil rights. It's an issue of human rights. It may affect the Hispanic population of the United States, but it is not a Hispanic issue. Now, that said, we live in a world, and I'm fortunate enough to teach at St. Louis University, where I'm preparing students on a daily basis to go work in a global economy that's increasingly interconnected. It's increasingly run by high technology. It's not unusual for our students to talk to people on other continents using programs like Skype, to talk to their families from the countries that they come from. This is the world that we're going to be living in. And to some folks, that's a scary process. They see the diversity of America as a threat and not as a benefit. That's understandable. And we can recognize that and understand where that is and work from it. But I would argue that it doesn't play to our best values as a society, as a liberal democracy, which is the system of governance that the United States holds as a beacon to the world, in some cases. So the question is, with all of this change, with the interconnections that we see developing increasingly across the world, with the diversity of our students that we see in our universities, that we see in our practices, that we see in our health clinics, what's the alternative to the kinds of responses that we've seen in Arizona? Let me just run through some of the scenarios that we could see as a result of these laws if we take these out in their practical application. Stretched to its furthest degree, just for an example, we take the Arizona law, an ambulance is called, taking an immigrant to the hospital is technically in violation of this law. Now, are those the values that we really want to adopt as a society? I think this is the question. When we take the implications of these laws, of state laws, of local laws, that are becoming increasingly punitive, what are the implications for the next generation? Let's think in terms of demographics very quickly. Now, we saw we have about 3.5% of the population is foreign-born here in Missouri. In other parts of the country, the percentage is much higher. So politically, for just a second, we have an increasing number of families that are mixed status. Children who are born here in the United States may have parents who are undocumented or are non-citizen residents. How is that generation going to react to their parents being targeted by these kinds of laws? This has a generational implication for our society in terms of politics, in terms of policy, in terms of what we become in the next 100 years. To bring that down locally to Missouri, I'm going to use another state as an example of what we could see. A few years ago, Oklahoma passed an extremely punitive law at the state level targeting immigrants, with the immediate result of a statewide economic downturn. Now, regardless of where you stand personally on immigration, there are some contexts that we should be aware of and that are often talked about in the sound bites that we see in CNN, the 10-second snaps. The reality is that the United States, since well before the Treaty of Guadalupe in 1848, had connections with Mexico, with Latin America. These connections involved the flow of families across borders. This is not a new process, as we heard earlier. The reality is that the federal government, and increasingly state governments are trying to follow this mode. The federal government has reinforced our border. Okay, so let's look at we'll start at the federal level. We're going to build a wall. Now, what happens when you build a wall? Well, the equivalent, and I think I said this when I was in a speech last year, the equivalent of trying to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border is the equivalent of trying to build a fence from St. Louis to San Diego. Pretty hard to do, and even harder to enforce. We've started to make it, we've adopted a process whereby we reinforce certain parts of the U.S.-Mexico border to push people out into the deserts away from the urban areas so we don't see the problem. Makes it increasingly dangerous for people who do continue to cross, die in the desert. All of these factors have contributed, and I give you the national context because it has an immediate relevance to our local context here, which I'll get to in just a second. The national context is, as we continue to push the immigration streams out into the desert, into the more dangerous areas, we also create a situation in which families no longer go home. Rather than a cyclical process of immigration that we had for roughly 100 years, even after the process, even after several levels of immigration law were adopted, that cyclical process continued until we started to build a wall to fortify our boundaries. We didn't stop the process. What we did was lock people inside. And so now we're seeing families in places across the Midwest. You saw the map earlier of Missouri, places where we don't think of as traditional immigrant destinations. Traditional destinations for, in this case, the Latino community. And yet they're there. This is the reality that we are going to be dealing with. One reaction to this reality has been the processes like we see in Arizona. But again, we see cloudy thinking. We see a conflation of undocumented immigrant with Hispanic. We see laws that are targeted nominally at undocumented immigrants that ultimately impact and influence the lives of legal residents, U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, and undocumented immigrants. This is the reality of the local laws and the state laws that we're seeing passed. This is the reality of the Arizona law. Implications range, and I wish I could pull Jenny's slide back up, but there's a whole range of implications that these laws influence. Everything from worksite practices. If you know that you can't report your worksite safety conditions at your worksite, you're much more likely to be injured. If you know that you can't go to the bank because they may identify you as undocumented, you're much more likely to be robbed. The implications that may not be immediately apparent have as much impact as the political debate that we see on television. And they have implications that are going to influence an entire generation of young people that are coming up in our society. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Policies and perceptions. We have not brought into the debate individuals that defend what's happening currently in those processes like in Arizona. So keeping that in mind, knowing that you may have questions, we will raise your hands, we'll give you the opportunity to frame your question. One of the panelists may elect to select, or you can direct the question to one of the panelists, and we proceed to the next one. We'll try to mix the questions as much as we can so that we don't stay in one particular topic because the evening is limited. And if we agreed on those purposes, who's the first one that would like to ask the question, besides Bob Fox? Mario?
I believe it was Ms. Jennifer that stated that there are only...
If you can stand up so that we can all And if you can project, will be much better. Thank you.
I believe it was Ms. Jennifer that stated that there's about maybe 20 or so police officers that are trained, quote unquote, trained to deal with immigration enforcing. How can an individual identify such a police officer? Or distinguish one from, say, maybe one is pretending to be one? How can we identify that and distinguish the difference?
That might actually be a question I kick over to Suzanne. I don't know that any of the officers who receive training under the 287G agreement have any type of distinguishing uniform or anything like that. And of course, other officers are charged with what the Missouri law is, that when a person is presented for incarceration, their immigration status should be checked at that time. Of course, is that happening to everyone? You know, maybe, maybe not, depending on the municipality or jurisdiction. But anecdotally, I know that the majority of those troopers who have been trained have been assigned to the I-44 corridor, the I-70 corridor, or the gambling and drug task force. So they're assigned essentially to casinos. And of course, not many in any place because there are not very many.
Have you any idea how many of them speak Spanish or other language?
I'm gonna guess none. I don't know that. I don't know. But I'm going to guess it's not very many, if any.
Next. Come on. Don't be afraid. And
It's just something, a point of clarification. Jennifer, Jenny, when you were talking about the non-citizen people, foreign-born in the area, you didn't really distinguish between the non-citizens who are fully documented and those who are undocumented, whatever word we're going to use, out of status, whatever. And the implication left over was somehow that there were 52% of them that were maybe undocumented, but it's not anywhere near that. That's almost none of them.
I'm sorry if I gave that impression. That was not what I meant at all. In fact, I believe that the majority of that 52% that comes from census data are most likely documented, and it can be. I mean, I think we've seen it this year in the 2010 census. That there have been outreach efforts, as always, and it can be difficult to convince a person without documents that it's safe to fill out the census form. So it can be very difficult to know, and of course the census doesn't ask what your status is. So it can be very difficult to know how many undocumented individuals actually reside in a particular place. And the estimates I've seen for Missouri, the Pew Hispanic Center, I think, is the one that's cited the most often. That it's between 40 and 60,000 individuals in Missouri who might lack.
Which would be relatively what percent of that then?
I think that's less than 0.5%.
Yeah, so it's a tiny, yeah, okay.
yes, please.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if somebody can put into context the Missouri, St. Louis especially situation in terms of anti-immigrant feeling. And just a little background, and I know that in 1860, St. Louis actually had the highest portion of foreign-born residents of any city in the country. It's half. 27% German, 16% Irish. By 1920, St. Louis had the lowest percentage of foreign-born residents of any city in the country. So it's first to last in 60 years. And since then, most of the last century was known as a black-white city with no immigration. But in the 70s and 80s, the State Department, partly because of that, started sending refugees here because it was seen as a safe place, no nativist hostility, because it wasn't an issue. And immigrants started coming in the 80s, also from after Prop 187 in California. So two streams. St. Louis was disproportionately refugees, which also mitigated some of the resentment. And also, there was no dominant ethnic group. There was no enclave. There was no little Chinatown, Havana, whatever. So it wasn't really visible. The whole panoply, as you've all said, of groups. Later, the Bosnians were somewhat dominant, but they're also white and so on. So there wasn't much hostility. at least through the mid-90s. Now, I know that in the last couple of decades, even though St. Louis's flow is still small, it's about twice the national average in the past decade, much higher than national in terms of foreign-born people coming here, whether immigrants or refugees. And now we've got an economic downturn. We've got, this becoming a really polarizing issue on the national level. So I'm just wondering if somebody can put into context the anti-immigrant, and I know immigrants right now are being told, hearing for the first time, go home, or even refugees who've been here for 20 or 30 years and never heard that before. But I'm just wondering if somebody can put into context the sort of the situation, the sentiments here, the legal problems, political problems, police stoppings, compared to elsewhere. Because again, historically, this has been a very quiet, safe, welcoming place for both immigrants and refugees. I'm just wondering if that's changing compared to elsewhere.
Who's taking? Richard? Joel, okay.
Sure. Yeah, I think your snapshot is fairly accurate. We're in the process of doing or analyzing data on a study that is doing exactly that, trying to get a sense of popular opinion in Missouri. The striking element that has come out of the survey for me to this point is the absolute lack of knowledge. I did a small 30-person survey across the St. Louis, the Missouri counties of the metropolitan area. And out of the 30 individuals that we spoke with, not one of them had heard of local legislation that had been passed. So Valley Park, completely off the public radar. No one was aware of it. Anecdotally, and I haven't had a chance to analyze it entirely yet, but by and large, attitudes towards immigration are not necessarily based on an understanding of the system, but rather from clips that we hear on CNN and Fox, and that's something that I want to look into more, kind of how the ideals are being framed. But there is definitely a growing awareness of immigration as an issue, and we saw a spike in awareness since 2006 and some of the marches and those kinds of things. Now, what that looks like, I'll probably know in more detail after, possibly after we do a statewide poll later this year with Mira. So I can partially answer your question there, and I'll know more probably a little later this year. Anybody else want to take that?
Anna?
I'm intrigued by the New York Times poll that was done in the wake of the passage of the Arizona legislation that indicated that age had a lot to do with how negative you were, how supportive you were of what had happened in Arizona with legislation, and that if you were over 65, it was like 85% or something supported the Arizona legislation, and if you were a baby boomer or whatever, it went down to like 57%. And by the time you got to the millennials in their 20s, it was something like 22% supported the actual legislation in Arizona. And that what it was saying in the article, which I think is really true, is that this fear, this lack of knowledge, it's generational. We have people who are over 65, etc. They were raised during the period of 1924 to 1965 when there was virtually no immigration to the United States, and therefore they simply didn't know people who didn't look like them. And you now have the younger generation who has this global perspective and, Skype somebody in China, and at 16 was over building houses in Ecuador or whatever it is, and they just look at the world very differently. And they look at this kind of information differently. Those are our kids, and it's taken us 20 years to raise them that way, I guess is what's happening. My question then is, identifying what is at the base of this issue with regards to the older you get, the less you know, what kinds of things can we do when we look at the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit in those older populations? And by that I don't mean the people who will be negative as long as the day is, but those people who are ignorant, but if they had the right information might be able to move a little bit more toward the center on the issue at least. What kinds of things out there are intriguing sorts of approaches that may be happening in other states or in other programs, etc., that we might be able to model some kind of a response after here in Missouri, which is among the older of the states, among the whiter of the states, among the less globally traveled of the states, and so we need that help. So I'd like some kind of a response from you of what you're hearing about in other places that might be transferable in some sort of a way or another.
I alluded to this a little bit, a welcoming initiative, which Joel also sort of mentioned, which is why we're doing some polling about immigration attitudes to talk about how we can learn how we can message a little bit better about the benefits and contributions of immigrants to our economy and to our communities. But I think what you're alluding to is a little bit more on the community level, and we belong to, Missouri Immigrant and Refugee Advocates belongs to a nationwide coalition called Welcoming America. And it's actually a really cool website, welcomingamerica.org. And it shows some of the public messaging campaigns that have happened in other states that are just very values-based, interesting, touching, emotional appeals about connecting with the people in our community, especially immigrants. And those campaigns also carry a grassroots component that aims to give people just what those folks that you're mentioning in their 20s have, the experience. They have the experience of immigration, knowing immigrants, meeting immigrants, maybe traveling abroad, and having more of that global experience. And then what kinds of programming can we present in the community that can mirror that effect for generations that might not have that first-person experience. So how can those individuals in the community meet an immigrant? Just simply hear their story, just simply get to know them. What the gentleman here was alluding to is that we've been a very black and white city and in many ways very segregated, even though there weren't maybe necessarily racial enclaves or ethnic enclaves. And people may not have a chance to get to know people who aren't like them still in our communities. So I think the programming we're aiming to do is based on giving people those experiences, whether it's through playing a board game that teaches them what the steps are to really becoming a citizen, or just meeting someone who's immigrated and hearing their story, language exchanges where people practice English and Spanish, movies with discussion component, anything that can sort of have that emotional or experiential component that's not threatening and not necessarily political at all, but just about learning and experiencing what folks in their 20s and younger are used to, sort of that globalized look at the world.
Joel?
Just two quick tidbits to follow up on that as well. One of the exciting things is that actually St. Louis University, we're starting a Latino Studies program, and as part of that, or that's going to be part of a larger coalition that we started between the University of Missouri St. Louis, WashU, and SLU, that's actually faculty driven and is the first, as far as we can tell, the first of its type in the country. It's a regional collaboration between universities, specifically that's faculty driven as opposed to institution driven. And the other thing is we're actually starting to do some research that people from other places with larger populations like Washington, D.C. Are starting to look at. So it's exciting, even though we don't have the tradition here. We've got some scholars and community groups that are working in tandem to actually develop those types of community outreach and effort here in Missouri.
Thank you. Please.
Right. I'm a real estate agent and I sell homes to low-income people. The problem that I do have is in regarding pool occupancy permits for people, even though they purchase the house and that they do it legally. And yes, Overland, you did state it's in. Well, the biggest problem is Overland. Woodson is just most recently changed their, in other words, they want in-state ID. Little by little, even Ferguson is for state ID. the problem that I have over and over again is their loan was right. I mean, it was, you know, they are good loans because it's justified their income and everything. But in my contract, it doesn't state, but the real estate contract, even through to the one from the board, it doesn't give a way out if somehow they can obtain an occupancy permit. And a lot of times I had to do my work backwards. Where do you want to move in? Oh, I want to move in a certain area. And I have to go like as a kind of like detective to find it out, hey, I don't want you to purchase a house if you are unable to get an occupancy permit. So therefore, little by little, and a lot of little municipalities, the door is closing. I've been living in here for 35 years, and the last 15 years, I've seen it at the local level, because I'm from Florissant, Hazelwood, North County. Long before I saw this thing, what you're talking about regarding Valley. Now, when it comes to the city, yes, the only requirement is how many people, you know, per square footage, which I understand that. You know, I understand the square footage, I understand everything else. But a lot of times, I have to find a legal way out for the customer to get out of the contract in order for him not to sign on something that he's not gonna be able to get a legal occupancy permit. And then it's changing on the daily basis. My question is, after all this, I hope everybody understands me. My question about all this, is that maybe a handout or a phone number or somebody that I can speak and ask these questions instead of doing it, my detective work through the back door?
Okay, Susan?
Because if I call over there, they don't tell me anything.
She's gonna give you an answer.
Well, I don't know if
Go
I'm
ahead.
actually gonna be able to give you a great answer. Because of ordinances would, you know, if it even is, in fact, if it's not a part of the ordinance, then it's sometimes a phone call to the clerk, or to the city attorney resolves that issue. But what that means is that somebody who's a visiting professor at one of the universities can't get a state ID. You can't unless you have employment authorization. If you're a visitor, you know, you're not getting you're legally here as a visitor to the United States, you cannot get a Missouri state ID, which means that that regulation would far exceed any legitimate purpose that it might have. And it just needs to be challenged. I don't think for the community, I understand you're working with individuals. For the community, the strongest approach wouldn't be to find out where people can live without having a state ID. The thing would be to find individuals who are willing to challenge the municipalities who are instituting those practices.
And for a more immediate solution, you may need to speak with an attorney who drafts your contracts to perhaps add some type of contingency clause in your contracts.
Well, the problem is that a lot of the people that I work with, I mean, they just don't have that type of money to get an attorney.
To give
You know, we
really
really shouldn't be letting the communities like that
Well,
force segregation in that way. They need to be confronted about the legality of that kind of activity.
I agree with what my esteemed panelists are saying, but the Equal Housing Opportunity Council has a list of all of St. Louis County and St. Louis City definitions of family and occupancy by municipality. So they have a listing, and the Equal Housing Opportunity Council has a 1-800 number.
So I've been around all over. What I'm stating in here is their code of compliance is very fussy. They don't exactly tell you until the person goes in there and tries to pull the occupancy permit.
Well, I will say from our office, we have many times made calls in Overland to
Oh,
the
I-
city
no,
attorney
Overland, oh.
and spoken to the city attorney and said, what are you doing? And they'll say, oh, they shouldn't be doing that there, and they need, somebody
Yeah.
may need to have identification, but not state identification. So if somebody has a matricula or a passport or some other identification that's government issued, not necessarily our government issued, they are entitled to get an occupancy permit. And
That is the stance right now. You are unable to get it through Hazelwood. As it stands right now, you cannot get it to Woodson, and that has been changed in the last 18 months. And little by little, there are small municipalities that I guess whenever I go to speak to somebody in City Hall, they give me the impression that they're getting some kind of they just say they are going to enforce this law.
Well, I think that what you need to do, probably, Mira, set up a meeting to be more specific. Maybe
Because
they'll be able to guide you, because you've done that, you know what you've done throughout the years.
Yes.
Maybe they will be able to assist you in addressing maybe other aspect, as well as Suzanne has indicated, sometimes a phone call makes a big difference to the proper office.
Yeah, I just need some contact
Well,
number, so instead of going through the back door and.
Yeah, thank you.
But
We know, yeah.
ordinance every day is changing.
Correct. Questions on this side of the side? Forward, yes?
Yeah, hi, my name is Celia. I work for a law firm, and I have a chance to interpret and translate for people. I'm bilingual, Hispanic bilingual, so I translate for Hispanics. And what are the rights? Okay. No, what are the rights for, my question is, the police has the right to come to anybody's house, and what are the rights for those civils? Do they have to open the door? What is the recommendation on these cases? What is it that, how can I explain, because they call me and they ask me if they should open the door when a police officer comes, or like sometimes we go for free to the church. There's St. Trinity Church in St. Anne's. St. Anne's is being like, the police officer, like, they stop anybody just because they look from another country. And you said that immigration is not only for Hispanics, but in St. Anne's, most everybody is Hispanic, and they look Spanish and they stop them because they're Spanish. So I just like to, because I love this country, and I want to be able to say something positive to these people, you know what I mean? Because in these cases, they're kids, they're already Americans, they're citizens. And there's a case right now of this father being deported, and the kid is from the United States, so where are the rights of that kid versus this person? I'm sorry, there's a whole bunch of questions, but if you can kind of give me ideas, how can I help, and and show also Missouri that we're here to put our input. Like this baseball player, he's Hispanic, and they gave him citizenship, Bulls. So, he got the citizenship. So we're here to try to help these people to get papers and work honestly and bring the best to our countries to this country. So, okay.
Okay, who can comment? Richard?
Yeah, I don't think there's any broad answer that we can give you to the specifics. Every case is going to be, a nuanced case is going to be specific by specific. I do have some literature that's in Spanish that I can give you regarding know your rights, what happens if you're detained by the police, if you're questioned. It has a card that basically says in English, I don't speak English, but I'm reserving my right to remain silent. I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to an attorney. So I can.
Oh, and they don't have the right to take them then.
So, and then
something like that's also available to download on our website at mira-mo.org. Under resources, there are English and Spanish versions of Know Your Rights booklets that just have information. And among us, there are several attorneys who've been very gracious and partnered with MIRA to do trainings at churches like Holy Trinity or other places.
People don't have any money, and so I'll get in contact with you.
If that's something you're interested in, please talk to me, because we've set those up all around the state, and it gives people a chance to hear from an attorney and, sometimes the booklet format isn't the easiest for people to digest, and so sometimes the presentation format is.
Yeah, because I want to talk to them in a way that they respect the law, that they don't think that because they don't have papers they can get away with things too, We have to respect the law.
One more, Joe. Susan?
Oh, just, if the police come to somebody's house, they need a warrant. And we have little index cards we give people in English that's, that they slide under the door and says, if you have a warrant, please slide it under the door. Because if they have a warrant, you should open the door, because if you don't open the door, they're gonna knock it down. But on the other hand, if they open the door to say, what do you want, the police officer gets their foot in there. And especially in households where there's what we call mixed families, where some people are documented and some people aren't.
Exactly.
You never know, somebody may be coming for one purpose, police for one purpose, and end up, leaving with the whole other thing in mind.
Yes.
Question over here? Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna speak Spanish and take a little from English.
They all know Spanish.
Ok, yo vine aquí como refugiada hace 6 años, 5 años y medio. Yo tuve un accidente de tránsito en el 2007 y los que me chocaron eran ilegales, no tenían ningún documento. En este momento estoy debiendo una cuenta de $70,000 de una cirugía que me hicieron. Alguna solución debe haber para esto y para este tipo de personas, porque ellos necesitan de una solución para poder estar aquí.
¿Entiendes inglés?
Sí.
Okay, you can answer in English. Go ahead, Susan.
Company, your uninsured motorist, I think maybe would cover some of that. I'm not an insurance person, that should have covered that. But this is why it's so important, to not have these kind of restrictive driver's license rules. It doesn't solve your problem, which is very tragic. But when people can't get driver's licenses, they can't get insurance, and then it impairs the entire public safety when something like this happens.
Sí.
So what is the answer is that in her case, because they were undocumented, go ahead, Richard.
If you have to make a report, there's an actual form you fill out if you have an accident and the other driver's uninsured. Have you done that already?
Sí, esto fue en el 2007.
Okay.
Y la aseguranza me reconoció, yo iba de pasajera de otra persona. La aseguranza me reconoció $25,000 para pagar todo esto, pero no es suficiente y todavía tengo la misma situación.
Can we address that separately with one recommendation, or we can go Omar?
To follow up on 2 questions from the lady and the gentleman here, and that's, one was brought up about racial profiling. The other gentleman was talking about police officers pulling you over. So we know that it's the troopers, not municipalities, that have that type of training and certification. We don't know, from what I'm hearing, we don't know if they have some type of card that they can say, yes, I've been certified, or no, I'm not that person. Okay, so who else has the legal right to ask you about your citizenship or not? I mean, who can pursue that?
It has to be an officer of the federal government, Department of Homeland Security. And it's most likely going to be someone from ICE that you're going to encounter.
Okay.
People understand what ICE is? ICE is not what we're going to back.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement, right?
No, it's not.
But on the other hand, the only thing, let's say somebody's in a deportation proceeding, the burden is on the government to prove that the individual is immovable. And if they can't prove that somebody is what they would call an alien, then the judge, would dismiss, terminate the proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
So the minute somebody says, oh, I'm from Mexico, they say, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Mexico, you've then admitted your nationality, and the government basically meets its burden. So, I mean, you don't have to tell a police officer, but, people, of course, faced with the reality of being, confronted with the police, that bare light bulb shining down, swinging at the table.
Right.
They say a lot of things.
And one of the concerns is that it's not just the police, but
Some people have concerns about getting health care, about going someplace, their kid's sick. Their kids may be American or may be citizens, but they have to take them to a particular facility, and they're concerned that they're going to be in some type of danger of being deported. So I just want to make sure that there's no one other than a federal agent or a certified trooper that can.
Well, in Missouri, there is protection for parents or custodial guardians in this situation that you're mentioning, where you're applying for an eligible child for benefits. Now, the statute doesn't have a lot of teeth. There isn't a lot of protection, but the statute does say that a custodial parent or guardian cannot have their status checked when applying for benefits for a citizen child or an eligible child. There's no penalty if the person does, so the person has to proactively know that it's their right not to say, my status doesn't matter when I'm applying for this child. But, that is the law here in Missouri. But, I think, unfortunately, it's what Suzanne is saying, that anyone can sort of ask you, where are you from, and I think what we're seeing is a trooper or a person, a law enforcement person who pulls you over isn't supposed to be checking your status at a roadside stop, but that's what we're seeing. I mean, Missouri law is that you can have your status checked upon incarceration, so when you're arrested and presented to, be incarcerated, you can have your status checked, but
that's just for incarceration, correct? It's not for.
Right, but the effect is that it happens at a roadside stop, or it happens in what in Arizona has been this lawful contact issue that has been coming up over and over in the press. What contact do the police have to have with you to then have that right to, ask you something like that? So the Missouri law is different than the Arizona law, of course, but of course it's the effect, not necessarily what the actual law is.
Please, you had a question?
This is in the context of his initial question and the comment. I would argue that rather than trying to recognize who are the officers that actually can, because anybody can try to mess with, and the police really want to mess with you, they're going to find a way to ask you if they want to. I think more importantly, in the context of the population, whether it's legal or illegal, but the immigrant population is, have there been any efforts in trying to educate the immigrant population about what our rights are? If somebody asks me, I'm a citizen of this country, but if somebody asks me, where are you from, I'm going to say I'm from Mexico, because this is where I was born and raised. And so I've always asked I answer with a question, where originally or where, but not everybody asks that question. So that have there been any efforts to try to educate the immigrant population about what are our rights?
Well, as I mentioned, Suzanne, I've partnered with Suzanne and with U.S. Legal Solutions with Gustavo Arango and somebody over here. And they've gone out and done presentations in different community settings. And I know they're very open to doing that, which has been wonderful, to let people know, regardless of their status, what rights they have when they encounter law enforcement on the street, at work, when you're driving, in many different situations. And that's something that is a service that's available out there. So, if you have a group that you think could benefit from that type of information, and again, there are Know Your Rights booklets that are available to be downloaded from our website. So, I think many of us have completely touched with that resource.
If I can just follow up on that, I'm not sure, I'm just concerned that those that are here, mostly those that are here illegally, may not have the resources to pull that information. And I don't have a group. I just wonder. You have all these people that go to churches. Just like in the black community, is to approach churches to try to reach out to the community. Have there been any efforts to try to reach those people that are on the ground, in essence? And to talk about, we have to challenge those statements from police. It's not that simple. In that, if you have to put a legal challenge, as it was mentioned, in terms of to a city or a a municipality, that requires money. And I mean, those people come without money. It's easy to answer, I'm just posing the question.
And you're correct, obviously, by making that clarification, particularly when Mira has a great website, but none of our community have computers, or they know how to use it, so they're not gonna go there. But I know for a fact that in many of our churches, that they do attend, those that attend, and keep in mind that not all do attend church services. They are provided services in most of the festivals that we have. Usually there is a kiosk or a tent where general information is provided. I'm sure that if they get to look at the pictures in Red Latina and the other newspapers, they may be able to also find some information. But it's obviously a great observation that not all know the information. Not all would like to know the information until the situation arises. Fortunately, there's some individuals within the community that are approached. I've been approached by, where do I get this kind of services? And I immediately get in touch with people that I think can help them, and we can address that particular individual. But it's in fact a problem. And I know that we can go on the rest of the evening. We do have a limited time here. We got some goodies that I'd like you to consume before we finish. But before we do that, we need to provide you, first of all, we need to thank the great panel for their participation. These are professionals that do earn their pay by doing what they do now, but they were gracious enough to come here and do it pro bono. We need to also thank Brown Shoe that is providing their facilities for our meetings for the rest of the year. So next year. And Cecilia had a question?
No, just mention one last thing. If we don't want this racial profiling, we need to start by us. Many people, like everybody in here, know each other, but we need to start trying to practicing compassion, practicing that not everybody is the same, but we know because someone, like by example, is Jewish, all the Jewish are like this. No, we need to start by ourselves first. Education is the most important, and trying to integrate ourselves to this country because it's a country in the one that we are living now. So if you are in this country, you have to do what this country wants. And if you used to do picnics or días de campo, aquí vas a hacer barbecues. That kind of stuff, cultural.
Thank you. We understand. We're going to, one second. We have our president, our chairperson, that would like to come to the podium and continue the programming so that because we're going to give you a chance sporadically to say any upcoming event that you would like us to be aware of and have the opportunity. You're going to have about 10 seconds to do that. So it's not a free commercial. Just tell us that, Puerto Rican Society is going to have a picnic next Saturday, that kind of a thing, very quickly, and I'd like you to lead that process.
I think it was a wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn about the topic of immigration. And I think this is what he was asking about, how can we know more? One of the mission, one of the things that the Hispanic Leaders Group is doing is this, providing education about topics that we consider are important to our community. Topics like immigration, health, education, economic development, and also I want to make sure that you see the value, and upon your leaving tonight, you make sure you pay your dues or your membership, which is $15, which if you are going to have a class or learn about this, probably you'd have to pay more. So we appreciate your support for that. And that money helps us to maintain that, but also part of that goes to other services like scholarship. Excuse me. The Hispanic Leaders Group has our statement of immigration. And this statement has been done a couple of years ago. So it's available, I'm sorry. Available in the website. So if you have the interest to know our thoughts, you can download. The statement is there in the first page. And I think now I would invite you all to say your name and a little very brief.
Because there's too many people here. Why don't we do the following? If you have any announcement to bring to us, please do it. I know Omar has one very quickly. Can we go that way?
My name is Omar Maldonado, and I'm the president of the Puerto Rican Society. And this weekend, we are hosting our annual summer picnic at the St. Louis Zoo. It's going to be from 10 to 5. We're going to have food. We're going to have dominoes contest, dance contest, scavenger hunts, and even a dessert contest. So I want to invite all you to come out and join us, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you. Patty?
Yes, I would just like to say for those that are interested in education and learning about other people from different racial groups, there's a group in St. Louis called the Women's Committee on Race Relations. I'm a member of that group. And what they do is try to go into different neighborhoods, do neighborhood walks, socialize, have potlucks, but it's a very diverse group. There might be 30 or more different ethnicities represented. I think it would be really interesting for people. If you want, you can give me a call. I'll give you my cell number if you want. I'll give you my email, and I'll put you in touch with the people. My cell is 618-570-8878. My email is Kubitschek, that's KUBITSCHEK @hotmail.com.
You can get it after the
Yes,
meeting.
and I know you're
More
all
specific.
probably thinking that's a good Irish name.
Thank you. Hector?
The city of St. Louis, since the beginning of this year, organized a group of professionals from several ways of life. It's called the Vanguard Cabinet. I have the honor to be in the diversity committee. And we are reaching to different communities in order to make St. Louis a more welcoming city. So this topic is very important, and we need to elevate this, at least, to the city. So I have my information. If you want more information about the Vanguard Cabinet, in particular the Diversity Committee, where I belong to, contact me.
Rose?
Yes, I'm Cheryl Rose with the Missouri Commission on Human Rights, and we offer training to employers and community groups, and one of the trainings that we offer is immigration discrimination, where we talk about national origin and ancestry discrimination, and I do have some brochures if you are interested.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Philip Dine. I'm a journalist. I spent 20 years with the Post-Dispatch. In the mid-'90s, I did a series of articles on immigration, spent a year or two on immigrants changing the face of St. Louis and refugees. Now I've been asked, I live in Washington, D.C. now. I spent the last 10 years with the Post in Washington, D.C. and left the Post-Dispatch. But now I've been asked to come back and do another series of stories on immigration and refugees in St. Louis. So I'd be really interested in, I'm going to give you my cell phone number, which is, I'd be interested in talking to anybody. There's too many people there, and I'm leaving tomorrow to go back to Washington. But if anybody'd like to call me and talk, I'd love to hear from you. It's 202-549.
You don't have your card?
I don't know. No,
That's okay.
I have, if anyone can dump me, I have a couple things. But it's 202-549-0435. That's 202-549-0435. My email is Philip with one L, PHILIPM, Dine, DINE @AOL.com, all lowercase. Thank you.
Great. Announcement, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Laura. I work here at Brunch Shoe, and I wanted to let you guys know there's a career fair here on August 9th from 4 to 7 p.m. So all are welcome to come and attend and tell everyone that you know. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I'm Sydney, and this is Ann. We're from Channel.
Listen up, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm Sydney, and this is Ann. We're from Channel 9, and we're doing a year-long project on immigration that'll result in a 4-hour documentary and hopefully a robust online presence for information and for hopefully good discussions. So I have a sheet here that kind of explains the project, has my email on it if anybody's interested. We do community conversations with different groups, and we're trying to rely on the community to tell us what those issues are, what should be put in the documentary, what you'd like to see online. So I have them here, and you're all welcome. We really want to hear from everybody. So
Thank you. Anybody else? Over here, please.
I'd just like you to remember to mark your calendars for the Festival of Nations. This year it's going to be last weekend in August, which is August 28th and 29th. And I'm sure you'll all want to be there.
We'll be there. Please.
Good evening. My name's Kerry, and I own a small insurance agency. And I'd like to introduce you to Josephina, who has joined me and is going to work as our translator for anyone that has issues with insurance and needs advice. I'm willing to go with Josephina and meet with them and explain things in simple terms so that they can understand what they are getting, what they need that's available, and whether or not they choose to buy from me is up to them. I would rather have them have the resource and the information so that they can make an intelligent decision about protecting themselves with insurance. As we know, it's required for automobiles. If you want to get a home loan, it's required for your house. I'd like to be that source of information, and I don't need to sell you the policy to provide the information and help you. And Josephine is kind enough to translate. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Daniel?
Yeah, I just want to announce that on Saturday Festival we'll have their Knights of Columbus Fiesta and Fluorescent Festival. So that's Saturday and Sunday, the 26th and 27th. It's free of charge, and there will be entertainment, Hispanic food, and entertainment basically. So
There was someone in the back. Yes.
School in the San Luis Northwest Immersion School. I just want to share with you that here in San Luis, Missouri, we have a Spanish school, and it is important that all the Hispanic children go there to learn the native language, because we know that it's important to learning a second language. It's better first to learn your native language, and then later to learn a second language. Then
what grade level is that?
We have kindergarten, first grade, and second grade for the next school year.
That's right. It's downtown St. Louis.
Yes.
Anybody else? Any other announcements? Over here.
Me llamo Alexandra Marx, soy un estudiante de español, yo tengo un año para graduar. Yo voy a la escuela en California y yo estoy muy acostumbrada a estas cosas de inmigración. Pero el punto es que estoy aquí para el verano hasta el fin del agosto. Estoy buscando trabajo, cualquier cosa para volunteer haciendo ya.
Okay.
Gracias.
We gave you something to do.
Yeah. 314-640-0303. Thank you.
Get in touch with me. August 6th, right in this location, the Hispanic Scholarship Alliance will be having the annual joint ceremony to award scholarships that are presented by the Association of Venezuelans in Missouri, the Hispanic Leaders Group, the Puerto Rican Society, and the ECS Fund, which used to be connected with the Chamber of Commerce, but is no longer. It's a separate not-for-profit, and Hacemos. So we expect to have a great audience as we had last year. The deadlines and applications are coming, and some have gone. So you need to visit the website if you have either a dependent and you need to live in the region of St. Louis, which covers, I think, all the way up to Washington, Missouri, and Illinois. You need to, if you know anyone that's graduating from high school and going to college now, or is in college or university, regardless of the degree they're pursuing, you can apply to these scholarships. They're available. If you're interested or have someone, you can contact me because I'm the chair of that alliance, and I'll provide you copies of the websites and the applications so that you can apply for them. Some of those deadlines is 30 June, some is the 1st of July, so they're coming in very quickly. They're looking for applicants, and in fact tonight There are applications out there for the Hispanic Leaders Group scholarships that are provided so that you can apply. We have been grateful and very proud of receiving sponsorship from Brown Shoe that is giving us scholarships and other agencies in the region. So we need to give them out. And we are always very proud because the competition is very competitive. We have great Latinos that are representing us and pursuing education. So that's Friday, August 6th at this place. It will not cost you any money. So we hope to see you in that fashion. Once again, Lenora?
Jaime, I just want to remind everybody to please sign up the attendance sheet that it was on each of these tables and return it to me, please.
Okay. We obviously, Maria?
Just wanted to remind you that Casa de Salud is open for business. We provide basic episodic care for individuals that have medical needs. And we are basically no cost. We have a donation, so if you can, of $25 to help basically with CASA, but certainly not a deterrent for anybody if they cannot pay that. So please spread the word that we want to make sure that we have good health for our community and we're doing our part. And the other basic thing is for all of us that are involved in the community, this is a great time just to exchange information. So I really urge you to, if you have any questions or if you have any resources, contact the website or contact Silea for the Hispanic Leaders Group so we can update all of that information and make sure that we have all of this wealth of information and resources available to the community.
Casa de Salud is located in Choto and
3200.
3200 Choto and Compton, across from St. Louis University. In fact, is a facility that is belonging to St. Louis University, and they donated for this great community service. Let me remind you that in August, either 10 or 11 is our next meeting. It will be right here, and I think that topic will be education. Is that what it is?
Yes.
I think it's education. So we expect to see you there. We very, very much thank you for coming in this evening. It's great to see a great audience. Do not forget to eat all the things that are back there. I hope to see you in August 6th or whatever. Muchas gracias.